Hello students, let us continue our discussion of scene 1 of Every Man in His Humour. Before doing that, let us do a small revision of what we learnt in the last class. In the last class, we learnt that Edward Novell, the father, is upset about his son's overindulgence in poetry. Edward Novell is reading a lot of poetry, so his father is upset about this. The father feels that reading poetry is useless, so he wants his son to stop reading poetry. This is what we note in the very first scene, that is scene 1 of Every Man in His Humour. We also read about a meeting between old Novell and Stephen. Stephen is old Novell's nephew and cousin of Edward Novell. Stephen has come to old Novell's house to borrow a book on hawking and hunting. Old Novell advises Stephen not to spend money over useless things. He wants Stephen to save money rather than spending it. In this scene, we also note old Novell receives a letter from Wellbred. Actually, the letter is meant for his son Edward Novell, but out of curiosity, old Novell reads the letter. After reading the letter, old Novell is shocked by the contents of it because Wellbred has used very bad and disrespectful words in the letter. In the letter, Wellbred has asked Edward to meet him at the old jury so that they can have some fun. After reading the letter, old man feels that the letter must have come from a dirty place like a hospital or a house of prostitutes, because the content of the letter is so bad, it is so dirty, it is so obscene, it is so disrespectful that the origin of that letter must be equally bad, and the person who has written the letter is ill-mannered, he doesn't have any good manners at all. So this is the opinion old Novell has after reading Wellbred's letter about him. So we will read old Novell's speech regarding this. Is this the man my son hath sung so? For the happiest wit, the choicest brain, the times have sent us forth. Now, after reading the letter, old Novell feels very bad about Wellbred. Why had he read the letter? He wanted to know more about Wellbred, about whom his son Edward Novell had been praising. Edward Novell had always said about Wellbred that he is a very good individual, he is very intelligent, has a lot of knowledge. So all this Wellbred had told, Edward had told to his father. So naturally the old man was curious to know more about Wellbred. That is why he had read this letter. But after reading the letter, he feels that Wellbred is really a bad character. So in this speech he asks, is this the person who has written this letter about whom my son Edward was praising a lot? So indeed he mustn't be anything of what my son had been telling me. He doesn't have any good manners at all. Maybe he is well educated, maybe he has degrees from the university, I know not what he may be in the arts. He may have had good education. About whom old novel is saying here? About well-bred. Well-bred may be having good education. He must have got degree from the university. But surely for his manners I judge him a profane and dissolute wretch. But what is his character? Is there any match between the degree that he has got, education that he has got, and the manners he has and his character? So there is no match. So old novel feels that this well-bred is profane and dissolute. He has a very disgusting character. He may be well educated, but from his manner of writing this letter, we understand that he is a very bad character. Old novel feels that well-bred is a rogue, otherwise he would never have written a grossly obscene letter to his friend. So old man is upset about the choice of words well-bred has used. He has used very bad language in the letter. So old man feels very upset after reading well-bred's letter. He also feels that his son Edward must have been very careful while selecting his friends. Let us read that portion where he says his son Edward novel must have exercised caution, must have been careful while selecting his friends. Well, my son, I had thought you had more judgment to have made election of your companions. Edward should have been more careful. He should have thought before making friendship with this kind of a character. How can he make friendship with somebody who has a disrespectful attitude towards elders, who doesn't know when to be serious and when to joke? So how can his son be with such kind of a person all the time, and who doesn't even know what character he has? Edward has been praising well-bred all the time, so he hasn't he doesn't know what is the real character of well-bred. So how is this possible? The old man wonders. Old novel, after reading the letter, hands over the letter to his servant Brainworm, asks him to deliver the letter to his son Edward, but tells him not to reveal that he, his father, had read the letter before giving it to him. So, old man tells his servant not to inform his son that he had already read the letter. Then by the end of the scene you have this long speech by old novel where he says, I am resolved I will not stop his journey. So old novel talks to himself. He makes a decision or he makes a plan not to stop his son. Now after reading the letter, Edward will surely start his journey to the old Jory where they are planning to meet each other. Edward wants to meet well-bred. Actually, well-bred had asked Edward to meet him at the old Jory. So immediately after reading this, Edward will start his journey. So here, old man says he will not stop Edward, because there is no use in stopping him, nor practice any violent means to stay. He cannot use any force to stop his activity or friendship with this man well bred, because the more you try to stop, the more you give punishment or the more you restrain, the person will become more and more violent, more and more impatient. So force or punishment is not the correct or the right way to teach somebody good manners. Whom can we stop or give punishment? To the weak person, somebody who will listen can be told, or you can forcefully stop children from doing something bad by giving them punishment. But what about youngsters? That is what he says. He can never stop the youthful son from doing what he wants. There is a way of winning more by love. So he can only teach his son to be good human being by being friendly with him, by telling him through love, not by violence or punishment. Force works on servile natures, not the free. So force or punishment can be given to the weak people, not the ones who are free. So they cannot be taught anything by the violent or the forceful method of teaching them. So he also says that there is no way in which he can stop his son who is youthful in nature, nor practice violent means to stay the unbridled course of youth in him. So the free spirit of youth that is there in Edward cannot be stopped by his father. If he tries to stop, he will become more impatient, he will become more and more violent, just like a dog which is restrained by tying it to a pole or something. It cannot be stopped. Such is the spirit of youth. So Edward novel cannot be stopped from wherever he wants to go or whatever he wants to do. So old novel can only let him go and learn from the experiences that he gains. As we know, experience is the best teacher. So old novel wants his son Edward novel to learn from the experiences that he has in his life. He also feels, old novel also feels that self-discipline, that is disciplining oneself, is the best teacher, and that will teach him good manners. So this is what old novel feels by the end of the scene. Old novel feels that instead of stopping Edward at home, he should allow Edward to go out and learn on his own. Secondly, force has no power over free-willed people. Now, Edward is a free-willed individual. He knows what to do. So his father cannot have any hold or control on him. So we have come to the end of scene 1. Let us look at a summary of scene 1 before we go to scene 2. What happens in scene 1? Old novel asks his servant Brainworm to call up his son Edward novel. That is the first few lines where old novel calls his servant and asks him to go and see what his son Edward is doing. Old novel is worried about his son's overindulgence in poetry. Old novel wants his son to stop reading poetry because he feels that it is useless. Next, Stephen, a country girl, arrives. We know Stephen is a relative of Edward novel and old novel. Stephen wants to buy a book on, borrow a book on hawking and hunting. Old novel warns Stephen not to spend money foolishly. So at that time, a servant arrives with Wellbred's letter. Old novel opens the letter and is shocked by the disrespectful words used by Wellbred, referring him. Wellbred has invited Edward to the old jury. Old novel asks Brainworm to give the letter to Edward. He asks Brainworm not to inform Edward that his father had read the letter. Now there is also a fight between Stephen and the servant who brings the letter. They have, Stephen is unhappy, thinking the servant is making fun of him. So he starts fighting with, Stephen starts fighting with the servant. I hope you remember this from the last class. And old novel interferes in this fight and asks Stephen to go away from that place and not to fight with a very honest and humble servant who has brought the letter. Old novel, end of the scene, feels that he should not stop his son from doing what he does because passion restrained grows more impatient. If he stops his son will only become more impatient, more violent, and he will become more disrespectful towards him. So it is better that he lets his son go and meet the friends that he has made and learn everything out of his experience. So with that, we come to the end of scene 1. Let us quickly go to scene 2. In scene 2, Brainworm delivers the letter to Edward novel. Wellbred's letter is given to Edward novel. Let me read a part of scene 2 for you. It takes place in a room in the novel's house. Enter Edward novel with a letter in his hand, followed by Brainworm. Edward novel, did he open it, sayest thou? Now we see that father had told servant not to tell the son about him reading the letter. Brainworm, but instead of keeping that secret, informs Edward that his father had already read the letter. That is what Edward is asking now. Did he open it? Sayest thou, did my father open this letter? Brainworm says, yes, on my word, sir, and read the contents. He not only opened it, but also read what was written. Edward novel, that scarce contents me. What countenance, prithee, made he in the reading of it? Was he angry or pleased? Now, when Edward novel comes to know that his father had read the letter, he becomes worried. He asks Brainworm, was he upset after reading this letter? Was my father angry after reading this letter? Did you see my father becoming angry? And now Brainworm replies, nay, sir, I saw him not read it, nor open it, I assure your worship. Now Brainworm says, he was not there when Edward, when old novel, opened the letter and read it. Now, Edward novel asked him, "No, how knowest thou then that he did either? Then, if you were not present at that place when my father opened the letter and read it, how do you know that he has read it?" For that, Brainworm replies, "Marry, sir, because he charged me on my life to tell nobody that he opened it, which unless he had done, he would never fear to have revealed." Now, Brainworm tells him that it was his father, old novel, who told him that he had read the letter, and he had made Brainworm promise that he will not inform anybody about this fact. Then old novel, Edward novel replies, "That is true. Well, I thank thee, Brainworm." Now, because Brainworm has shared this information, Edward novel is very happy. Now, Brainworm wants some kind of a favor from this his young master. That is why he is revealing all the secrets to Edward novel. So Edward novel reads the letter. Here was a letter indeed, to be intercepted by a man's father and do him good with him. He can't but think most virtuously, both of me and the sender, sure. That make the careful costermonger of him in our familiar epistles. Well, if he read this with patience, I'll be dealt and troll ballads for Master John Trunder yonder the rest of my mortality. So he says, if my father had actually read this letter, he would have been very angry with me and I would have been thrown out of my house. But it looks like my father has gained more and more patience. That is why he is neither angry with me nor he has asked me to leave the house. Edward says that Wellbred's letter reached him at a time when his father was patient. Otherwise, it would have made his father very angry. So here, Edward Novel says that the letter had reached them at a very lucky time. Otherwise, his father would have been very angry with him. At that time, Stephen enters Edward's room. Stephen is actually looking for the servant who had quarreled with him. Brainworm tells him that the servant has already left. Now, seeing Master Stephen, Edward Novel says, "What, my wise cousin? Nay, then I will furnish our feast with one more gull toward the mess." So, seeing Stephen, Edward is very happy. In Wellbred's letter, Wellbred had written that there are some foolish people there with him who can be a source of enjoyment for them. So, Edward feels that if he can take Stephen with him, there will be three people and they will have a lot of fun. He writes to me of a brace, and here is one, that is three. Or for a fourth fortune, if ever thou it use thine eyes, I entreat thee. So, if he can take Stephen with him to the old jury, they can have a lot of fun. So, Edward remembers that Wellbred had written about meeting a few fools in his letter. If Stephen also goes with him, the total number of fools will be 3. So, all of them can have a lot of fun at the expense of foolish people like Stephen. So he, in a way, Edward, in a way, entreats his cousin Stephen to accompany him to the old jury. This is what he says. Why be so gentle, cause? Cause means cousin. And I pray you, let me entreat a courtesy of you, and let me request you, please oblige me. I want you to accompany me to the old jury. I am sent for this morning by a friend in the old jury to come to him. It is but crossing over the fields to Moorgate. Will you bear me company? Can you please come with me to the old jury? This is asked by Edward Nowell. He is addressing Stephen here. I protest it is not to draw you into bond or any plot against the state. So there is no harm in you accompanying me to the old jury. Can you please come with me? Okay, so this is what Edward asks his cousin Stephen. The intention behind it is of taking Stephen is Edward wants to have some fun at their expense. Edward requests his cousin to accompany him to the old jury. Edward wants to have some fun at the expense of his cousin Stephen. So, in order to take him along with him, he makes a long speech where Edward, praises Stephen of what all good qualities he has. And now your turn, cause. Do you know what you say? A gentleman of sorts, parts, carriage, and estimation, to talk of your turn in this company, and to me alone, like a tankard bearer at a conduit, a weight that hitherto his every step hath left the stamp of a great foot behind him, as every word the savour of a strong spirit. Edward Nowell praises his cousin Stephen by telling him that he is a great person, and every step that he takes has left a glorious mark behind. Every word he speaks, who speaks? Stephen speaks, is characteristic of a strong soul, and a man like him, so graceful and great. Somebody like him shines brightly than all the ladies who dress up for an event. So in this way Edward praises Stephen so that he will be very happy while he visits the old jury along with him. So he keeps on praising Stephen all the time, and Stephen agrees to go with him to the old jury. So there's a long speech here which I am cutting short so that we can have a summary of scene 2. Brainworm hands over the letter to Edward. This is what we saw in the beginning of scene 1. Brainworm informs Edward that his father has read the letter already. Stephen comes looking for the servant. The servant who brought Wellbridge's letter had fought with Stephen. Stephen had fought with the servant. Now he comes looking for the servant. Edward wants to have fun, asks Stephen to accompany him to the old jury. There in the old jury, they are planning some entertainment. Edward wants to take Stephen with him so that they can have additional enjoyment, because he is a foolish person. All people can have fun at his expense. So with this we have come to the end of scene 2. We will continue in the next class.